Today's snapshot will be covering Chapter 18, which is on analyzing information and writing reports. I would first off like to thank Chris Shelvin for designing the PowerPoint used in our presentation today. Back in Chapter 15, we covered the first two steps in a report, which is defining the report, and gathering the necessary data and information. Today we will be covering the last three steps, which is analyzing the data and information, organizing the information, and writing the report. So first off, we have analyzing data. Analyze gathered data so that the report contains tight logic. A good report starts with good data. It is important to take your data from reliable sources. Even if your data comes from reputable sources, you have to practice healthy skepticism. Start by asking yourself, how do they know? Or what could prevent this data from being correct? Always check that the data aligns with your expectations and make sure that any assumptions are identified. When choosing your information, use only what your audience needs to make a decision. Avoid putting in information just because you have it or because you felt like you invested a lot of time finding it. The amount of information required depends on whether the audience is likely to be supportive, neutral, or skeptical. If your audience is supportive, you can be concise and direct. If your audience is not so supportive and skeptical, you should provide them with substantial evidence to support your claims. If you have information that is not crucial to your proof, it can be included in the appendix. If you want to arrange your information so that it will be the most useful for your audience, the following guidelines will help. The first is to process your information before you present it to your audience. The order in which you first became aware of the information is generally not the best order for the audience. Secondly, when you have a lot of information, group them into 3 to 7 categories. The average person's short-term memory can only hold 7 chunks, though these chunks can be of any size. So with this, it helps your reader by grouping information into categories. Lastly, you need to work with the audience's expectations and not against them. Introduce the ideas in the overview in the order in which you discuss them. Some basic patterns of organizing information is listed here. These include comparison and contrast, problem and solution, elimination of alternatives, a SWOT analysis, general to particular or particular to general, geographic or spatial, functional, and lastly, chronological. There are 3 types of reports which we will look at today. These are informative and closure, recommendation, and justification. Informative and closure reports summarize completed work or research that does not result in an action or recommendation. Closure reports also allows firms to document alternatives they have considered before choosing a final design. Recommendation reports evaluate 2 or more alternatives and recommend one of them. Whether your recommendation will come at the beginning of the report or in the end will depend on your audience and the overall culture of the organization. Finally, we have a justification report, which recommends or justifies a purchase, an investment, a hiring, or a change in a policy. To write a report effectively, it is important to keep these 4 points in mind. The first is to use clear and engaging writing. A lot of people want to read a report quickly, but it is important that they can still absorb the important points. Be clear and precise will promote this. Next is to keep repetition to a minimum. Although some repetition may be needed, too much might call for some reorganization of the report. Next is to introduce sources and visuals. With this, it is important to use active rather than passive verbs. Lastly is to use forecasting, transitions, topic sentences, and headings, which is a great way for organizing your report. Here we have a list of common parts included in the design of a formal report. These parts include title page, letter or memo of transmittal, table of contents, list of illustrations, an executive summary, introduction, background and history, the body, and then finally the conclusion and recommendations. So in conclusion, by following these steps and recommendations, we can assure you that you will have a well-designed and effective formal report.